그리고 주일은 이제 나의 날이 아니라 주님의 날이다. 예수님의 말씀을 실천하고 예수님과 함께하는 시간을 더 많이 갖고 내가 기도하는 그런 날이다. 이렇게 여러분들 기억하셨으면 좋겠습니다. 자, 그러면 또 미사의 순서에서 나오는데 오늘 이게 가르칠 게 무진장 많네요. 자, 보죠. 미사는 말씀 전례와 성찬 전례라는 두 개의 큰 축으로 이루어져 있으며, 말씀 전례는 시작 예식이 있고 성찬 전례 다음에는 마침 예식이 있습니다. 여러분들 이거 뭔 소리인지 하나도 모르겠죠? 미사
And this is our weekly video on psychiatry and society. And probably you might be able to tell from my dress, we're going to talk about the 4th of July coming up in a couple of days. And this year, if you haven't already noticed, is different. Not only because our politics are different this year, but next year, 2026, will be the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence. And we're going to talk about adding onto that with a social psychiatric declaration of interdependence, right? Which has come up actually off and on since 1944 or so. There's been a quest for putting together something globally as well as locally about interdependence, a declaration of how we are important to one another. And really everything that has been tried has failed, which says maybe how difficult it is, but also how important, because we are so important for one another, right? So, the prior Declaration of Independence was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I'm just trying to add on to that with something pertaining to psychiatry and an additional point of view. So this is lives with a plural, freedom of our minds, another plural, and our pursuits of mental health and decrease of mental illness. That could be summed up probably better, but you'll get the gist of it, talking about the plural versus the singular. So life turning into lives is, in essence, because we are dependent on one another. There's a saying of South Africa called Ubuntu, I am because we are, and similar sayings in other countries and also religions for that matter. And again, it's because the essence of our well-being is social. Two people at least, going on to many more to countries. And in psychiatry, it's the essence of psychiatry, right? Because whatever we do is generally with a therapist and a patient, and the therapeutic alliance is so important. So freedom of minds actually is a takeoff from the work of Stephen Hassan, and he is a psychologist, and he's written a couple chapters about cults for our books on religion and psychiatry, but he also has a website and a resource center called Freedom of Mind. And it's in essence, freedom from your mind being overly influenced by outside sources. Now, that gives us actually a caution for interdependence, because you can have interdependence, in fact, you do have interdependence in cults. So this is a negative interdependence with which he works on. And there's a colleague and friend of his and mine named John Attack in Great Britain who does similar things to try to help people get out of cults or prevent cults from forming in the first place. And I've had the honor of being interviewed by him about every 2 months on his YouTube called John Attack Family and Friends, something like that. I think the last one was May 24th, and the interview was about when groups go crazy. So you might be interested in taking a look at that. It's about an hour interview, and he's quite knowledgeable about cults also. The third clause, having to do with the pursuits of our well-being and decrease of mental illness, is sort of self-explanatory. The essence of our work is helping people recover some from mental disorders, and when you think about it, it's enhancing people's freedom of minds when you reduce their anxiety, when their depression is reduced, when the influence of trauma is reduced, and so on. But recently we've added positive psychiatry, especially led by Dilip Jesti, and also now lifestyle psychiatry. So we've broadened our approach, and that leaves me feeling that should be an overall goal of psychiatry for this year. Positively psychiatry would have this emphasis on interdependence and how that can supplement independence, sort of adding the we to the me. So regardless, I hope you enjoy your 4th of July. We're in a country where obviously there's a lot of conflict between people and between groups, and maybe this year will be one where we can make some progress toward working more together and end up perhaps with a big march for unity of interdependence. And this is Dr. Moffick signing off, and I'll see you after the 4th of July. Take care.
한 챕터씩 제목이 있잖아. 그걸 한 번 쓰고 읽어봐야 돼. 안 읽어보면은 쓰는 의미가 없어. 아, 형아가 역사 강의가 너무 재밌다고. 잠비아에서 둥글
Try to get a step further into dependence. You said it's care, but it's pain. You said it's care, but it's pain. Now, you know how messed up that is?
में एटलिस्ट हम 4 से 5 क्लास प्रोवाइड करें, क्योंकि मॉर्निंग टाइम में आते हैं तो आप लोग को डेली बेसिस पे क्लास देंगे और डेली हम लोग क्वेश्चंस को क्या करेंगे, प्रैक्टिस करेंगे। इससे क्या होगा कि हम मल्टीपल जगह पे काम कर पाएंगे, हमारा एग्जाम्स का भी प्रिपरेशन होता जाएगा, हमारे टॉपिक्स भी चलते जाएंगे और हम कुछ एमसीक्यूज भी इन बिटवीन करेंगे। सो नेक्स्ट क्लास में आप एक रफ कॉपी के साथ आएंगे और पर डे हम आपको एक क्वेश्चन का चैलेंज देंगे। क्लियर है? और ऐसा ही नहीं, उसका आंसर भी बता।
The brain isn't designed for this though.
No, it's not.
This is what I've come to learn. So do the podcast, it goes well. It feels like at the start everyone loves me.
Yeah.
And then I get further down the line and it feels like everyone fucking hates me.
Yep.
Because you get attacked from, you can never do anything right. Especially
I've probably read like comments or tweets, or I've probably in my lifetime read over 5,000 messages or comments or something telling me to kill myself. I mean, you know what I mean? You know, just like, and what would possess someone to tell you to like leave a comment where it's like fucking kill yourself? You know what I mean? So agreed. Like we were not meant to receive this kind of feedback from basically anyone anywhere in the world. You know what I mean? Just all consistently day in and day out for in my case now over a decade.
has it ever really got to you?
봤을 때 이러한 중요한 직을 맡음으로써 주요 당직을 맡음으로써 당에 착근하는 어떤 과정을 밟을 수 있고 지난 대선부터 그런 움직임이 좀 있었잖아요. 김문수 후보를 적극적으로 미는 모습을 보여주면서 심지어 별로 관계가 좋지 않다고 보여졌던 이준석 전 후보와 회동도 하고 같이 돈가스도 먹으면서 뭔가 단일화를 대신해서 시도하려고 하는 그런 모습까지 보여준 것으로 당원 전반에게 이렇게 좀 어필하는 모습, 그것의 연장이 아닐까, 이 정도 해석합니다.
왜 안철수 의원이라고 보십니까?
일단은 한동훈 전 대표는 안 돼.
아, 그래서요?
네, 라는 보석이죠. 왜 그러냐면 안철수 의원을 혁신위원장으로 앉힌 거는 저도 의외였고요. 사실상 지금 국민의힘이 가장 혁신을 위해서 해야 될 일은 탄핵 반대에서 벗어나야 됩니다. 그걸 좀 쉬운 말로 탈윤을 해야 됩니다. 윤석열이라는 그 오명에서 탈출해야 되는데 탈출을 못하고 있어요. 지도부 자체가 다 친윤 지도부로 다시 구성이 돼 있고 여전히 탄핵 반대 당론은 철회하지 못하고 있습니다. 용기가 없죠. 이제 그런 상황에서 국민들한테 그럴싸하게 혁신한다고 보이려면 외부에서 사람을 데려와야 되는데 아니면은 탄핵 찬성하는 쪽에서 데려와야 되는데 탄핵 찬성한 쪽에 가장 큰 지분은 한동훈 전 대표예요. 근데 한동훈 전 대표를 데려올 수도 없는 노릇이고 하지도 않겠지만 그런다고 해서 조경태 의원을 데려오면은 또 이게 당에 분란이 있을 것 같고
거기도
친한계니까요. 그러면 추리고 추려서 탄핵을 그래도 찬성했는데 친한계는 아니고 그리고 친윤적과도 관계가 있는데 국민의힘의 뿌리를 아직 내리지 못해서 외부인처럼 보이는 안철수를 낙점한 게 아닌가. 아직도 송원석 원내대표 눈에는
가 와보시면 아시겠지만 미사를 크게 보게 되면은 와가지고 저기 뭐요 하느님 말씀을 듣고 신부님 강론을 듣는 부분까지를 뭐라고 부르느냐 말씀전례라고 들어요. 왜냐 이때는 하느님 말씀을 갖고 하느님께 예배드리는 순간이기 때문에. 그리고 난 다음에 신부님 강론이 끝난 다음에 성가가 한번 부르고 나서 뭐 주일 같은 경우는 봉헌도 하죠. 봉헌하고 나서 그 다음에는 어떻게 되느냐? 신부님이 아까 말했던 제대에 서가지고선 이제 기도 막 하면서 갑자기 빵을 막 이렇게 들어 올리고 뭐 이게 잔도 들어 올리고 이러고 나서 내려와가지고 막 교우들에게 막 이렇게 나눠주고 여러분들에게는 안수해주고 이렇게 하잖아요. 요거를 뭐라고 부르느냐? 성찬전례라고 해요. 자. 요거는 예수님의 최후의 만찬을 기념하는 순간이에요. 자, 그리고 요 말씀 전례는 하느님 말씀을 듣는 시간이에요. 그래서 미사의 은총이 충만해지려면 어떻게 해야 되냐? 왜 먼저 말씀부터 들을까요?
금을 깎아냅니다.
이 성체 안에 살아계시는 예수님을
어느
만나고
이름 모를
체험하기
행성에
위해서
불시착한
반드시
거인이
필요하기
된
때문에
것처럼
먼저 말씀부터
조심스럽게
듣는 거예요.
그 찰나를
예를
걷습니다.
들어서 여러분들 자녀들이 집에 놀러 오게 됐을 때 아니면 여러분들이 뭐 누군가에게 놀러 가게 되었을 때 그냥 아무 얘기 없이 밥만 먹고 와요. 그러면은 그 사람과 내 만남이 그냥 밥만 먹고 왔으면 그래도 밥 먹은 시간 동안 함께 했으니까 무엇인가 함께하고 나누는 시간이 됐을지 모르겠지만 밥 먹기 전에 예를 들어서 여러분들 자녀들 집에 놀러 갔거나 자녀들이 놀러 왔을 때 대화를 먼저 나누고 힘든 얘기도 듣고 이러면은 밥 먹는 시간 동안 그 의미가 더 깊어지게 되겠죠. 그죠? 네. 그렇기 때문에 미사에서 정말로 모두가 다 중요하지만 내가 성체 안에 살아계시는 예수님을 깊이 체험하려면 이 말씀 전례부터 내가 잘 임해야 됩니다. 말씀을 잘 들어야 돼요. 나도 자녀들은 거역할 수 없다. If you live your life according to Ten Commandments, you pretty much end up very good. Keep on what is it? You shall not murder. You shall not. If there was a little one, you shall not harm others. Kind of like you keep on hurting people. You're gonna get hooked up. You keep on cutting person's freedom, and you get something like policy. Well, what the? I think there's something like if you even diminish the person's ability to further or person's free will further.
So my goal.
Something like
This is how to get in shape fast.
If you want to drop this, start eating more of these.
In fact, you can just take your rear view mirror and throw it out the window. Some of us dwell in the past and move forward, so it's either pulling you towards something you want. And if it doesn't know the answer to these questions, with beliefs influence on human consciousness. And the thing we have to solve is how to make care and compassion more valuable than self-importance and impermanent things. And the ultimate solution is broadly awakening the enlightened mind of spiritual consciousness. We need another miracle moment in which everyone realizes that we're in this all together and that the earth is the only spaceship that we get. And Star's Edge has laid the foundation. Future that cooperating is more fun than competing, and that honesty is better than pretense. And we learn to satisfy ourselves with reasonable wants that do not contribute to anyone's suffering, including reasonable wants that do not contribute to anyone's suffering, including future generations. And we learn sharing is more fun than accumulating, that cooperating is more fun than competing, and that honesty is better than pretense. And we learn to satisfy ourselves with reasonable wants that do not contribute to anyone's suffering, including future generations. We set up avatar boot camps that experientially teach people how to conduct efficient and peaceful social interactions. I mean, nations can become internally harmonious by following the direction of their wisest members rather than the richest or the most popular. The first bylaw of every group should be respect everyone. Social justice systems can be created that correct with education and rehabilitation. Prisons can be turned into schools. And instead of raping the planet of her natural resources, which we will soon exhaust, we develop self-sustaining resources, and we take a solemn pledge to pass to the next generation the planet in better shape than we found it. We can do that. Do tomorrow. Follow, contribute to the creation of actualization. The game, Harry, not whether you win. Weekend. And Christ had a lesson for that. He said, what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his soul? And I don't know how many people have given up on their goals, even worthwhile goals, because of discouragement. Honest in saying, I got discouraged and gave up an enlightened planetary civilization. still more relaxed and better able. Yes.
Here's a 30-second bedtime ritual you can do to awaken your pineal gland. Did you know that your pineal gland's inability to connect
Thank you. Thank you. Whew. Thank you. Please sit down. My ego can stand no more. Thank you for making some time for me. First thing I'd like to do is welcome the 373 new masters from 32 countries to the Avatar Network. Welcome aboard. Hey, do you remember when you were a kid and someone would ask you, if you only had one wish, what would you wish for? More wishes, right? Okay, here's a question like that. If you could know everything there was to know about one subject, what subject would you pick? I would pick consciousness. Because I have a suspicion that if I knew everything there was to know about consciousness, I'd know everything there was about everything. So how does someone study consciousness? Let's see, they could read a lot of books about the subject. They could do a search on the internet. They go to a library. Volunteer at a research foundation where they put electrodes in people's heads. And maybe in 10 years, they would be considered an expert. They could quote from William James and Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung and Jung. You see how you get Jung? That's the expert pronunciation. And they could talk about ego and id and superconsciousness, and they could name drop Baba whatchamacallit and Ken Wilber. And eventually they could write a book and call it, What is Consciousness? Now, of course, in the meantime, when they're not completely absorbed in their books, their life feels empty, lonely, meaningless. And their book on consciousness, it's not selling as well as Deepak's book on consciousness. And the last 2 jobs they had fell through. And their girlfriend is dropping them for a part-time lawnmower mechanic. So. Sad story. Now I could go on, but what's wrong with this picture? They are lost in concepts. Now, a concept is something that is thought or imagined. Somebody has thought up or imagined it. And you see, they haven't really been studying consciousness at all. They have been studying concepts of consciousness. Can you imagine studying food and never eating any? And you could be an expert on cuisine and starve to death. Now, there are 2 kinds of knowledge. There's secondhand knowledge of things that you've heard or read about, and there's firsthand knowledge that you've gained from personal observation and experience. Now, the purpose of both kinds of knowledge is to do something. I mean, to accomplish something, to change something that exists into something better. And the problem with our student of consciousness is that he's an expert in concepts about consciousness, but he can't do anything about the real problems of life. And while he has a lot of second-hand knowledge about consciousness, he lacks the skill to change his life into something better. Maybe he can make better concepts, but they're still not going to help him. You know, it's time for him to look inward, time for him to do avatar. If you want to explore the powers and the pitfalls of your own consciousness, you have to look inward. And every human being has a privileged access to a private universe of consciousness. A private universe of consciousness in which he can be king, emperor, or even God Almighty if he so desires. And sadly, a lot of people have wandered into this kingdom and they're lost. They bottle up a little bit of consciousness and they call it their mind. And now trying to look at consciousness from a bottled up bit of consciousness is to become lost in mirrors. If they had known that there was a viewpoint which can be aware of consciousness but remain independent, they would have been all right. Avatar again. So they're in their bottle and they have forgotten the way in and the way out. They don't know what they are or who they are or where they are, so they make something up. And now they're thoughts floating in a bottle. I mean, imagine living in a magic kingdom where you own everything and you're the only real person and yet you choose to bottle yourself up and play the role of victim. How foolish is that? Remain independent, they would have been all right. Avatar again. So they're in their bottle, and they have forgotten the way in and the way out. They don't know what they are, or who they are, or where they are, so they make something up. And now they're thoughts floating in a bottle. I mean, imagine living in a magic kingdom where you own everything, and you're the only real person, and yet you choose to bottle yourself up and play the role of victim. How foolish is that? Hmm? The product of Avatar is a source being. I seem to keep saying that over and over. The product of Avatar is a source being. An awake source being who has experientially realized that he or she is not a body, is not bottled up consciousness, is not thoughts, memories, or imaginations floating in the bottle. An awake source being is a self-determining, non-material spirit, compassionate, positive, and responsible. Now, the reason I say awake is because everybody thinks he's a source being, but not every source being has had an experiential awakening. And if a source being is awake, they have the power to deliberately create, discreate, or reorganize, rebottle consciousness. And if a being isn't awake, they're stuck in think-its, and their actions are indoctrinated. If you decide that you're happy, but I tell you you're unhappy, who's right? I mean, the only way I can be right about your universe is if you decide to allow me to be right. And if you agree with me that you are not happy, create or reorganize, rebottle consciousness. And if a being isn't awake, they're stuck in think-its, and their actions are indoctrinated. If you decide that you're happy, but I tell you you're unhappy, who's right? I mean, the only way I can be right about your universe is if you decide to allow me to be right. If you decide to be stuck in your life. 그렇게 약을 더 이상 안 먹겠다고 하면 who's right? I mean, the only way I can be right about your universe is if you decide to. I mean, the only way I can be right about your universe is if you decide to allow me to allow me. Right about universe. If you decide to allow me, if you speak something, then speak something about yourself, then I decide to allow me to be right. And if you agree with me that you are not happy, right about your universe is if you decide to allow me to be right.
So it's this level of right, being right, good, not being wrong. We're talking about that person. Being right, good, not. If you decide to, if you allow me to be right. Making someone angry all the time, like me, you being right, not going against the permanent will and control not permanent will, your moral will, which is but of you that consequences so with the people. You allow me to be right.
And if you
agree with me, that if you agree with me,
you agree with me that you are not happy,
if you agree with me that you are not happy,
then you
then you can, if you agree with me, you are not happy. You can blame me, you can blame me, you can blame me for making your life unhappy. 그러니까 내가 행복하다는 것을
is if you decide to allow me to be right. And if you agree
agree with me that you are not happy, if you agree with me that you are not happy, if you agree with me that you are not happy,
agree with me that you are not happy, then you
can blame me for
you can blame me for making your life unhappy. Well, that's where my work. And pretty soon you're going to have to call me to determine whether or not you're hungry. See, that's acute codependence, very far removed from source being. And there are a lot of people competing to define each other's consciousness rather than honestly confronting their own. Define each other's consciousness rather than honestly confronting their own. But there are also beings who would be, that you would be happy to have influence your universe. I guess who would be that you would would be happy to have influence your universe. I guess what I'm saying is there are good influences and bad influences. And the good influences will remind you that you're source. And the bad influences will encourage you to blame others. A blame is assigning the cause of how you feel to the consciousness that you have bottled for someone else. You really want to trade the role of source being for victim bottle? I didn't think so. So it's good if we gain some firsthand knowledge of your own. Conscious landscape. Unfortunately, firsthand knowledge can be wrong. You can acquire firsthand knowledge that is false, especially if you're looking at it from a bottle. You can misinterpret something that you experience. And it's common for eyewitnesses to an event to describe the event entirely different as false. You can misinterpret something that you experience. Unfortunately, firsthand knowledge can be wrong. You can acquire firsthand knowledge that is false, especially if you're looking at it from a bottle. You can misinterpret something that you experience. And it's common for eyewitnesses to an event to describe the event entirely different.
그러니까 흔하게 목격자가 어느 모든 일 앞에 목격자가 하는 게 설명하는 게 완전히 다르죠.
The event entirely differently. Eyewitness testimony, even though it is firsthand knowledge, is notorious.
Eyewitness testimony, even though it is firsthand knowledge, 그가 firsthand knowledge가 뭐고 처음 보는 지식, notoriously 아주 악하게 틀렸다.
Notoriously inaccurate. Around 1920, the Harvard Psychology Department threw out introspection as a reliable tool for studying consciousness. All reports based on introspection were invalidated by the declaration that people only see what they expect, by the declaration that people see consciousness. All reports based on introspection.
All reports based on introspection were invalidated by declaration. 그러니까 모든 보고는 사람들이 보는 모든 보고는 그 불합격 증명 by declaration. 불합격 증명 by declaration. 그것에 대한
were invalidated by the declaration that
people only see what they expect. 그러니까 사람들은 볼수 people they expect. 그 사람들이 보는 것을 자기들이 예상했던 걸 보는 걸 예상했던 것만 보거든요.
People only see what they expect to see. And Harvard's fail-safe argument
하버드 그러니까 자기들이 보고 싶은 것만 보거든요. 하버드
was that if you really studied consciousness by introspection,
consciousness is introspecting on itself. If you really study consciousness by introspection,
he studied consciousness by introspection.
약간 양심이라고 했어요. 양심이라는 말은 의식이 뭘 관찰할 때, 의식이 관찰할 때, 그러니까 내가 보는 눈을 눈을 이렇게 관찰하는 것을 과정을 보면은 의식이라고 했어요. consciousness introspecting on itself. 그러니까 의식이 그냥 의식을 보거든요.
The only thing you would see would be consciousness introspecting on itself. Now, there's a guy named Copthorne MacDonald. He's a writer, an independent scholar. And he notes that after rejecting introspection, quote, psychologists turned almost exclusively to behavior as described in terms of stimulus and response. And consciousness, quote, psychologists turned almost exclusively to behavior as described in terms of stimulus and response. And consciousness was totally bypassed as a subject. A survey of 8 leading introductory psychology texts published between 1930 and the 1950s found no mention of the topic of consciousness in 5 texts, and in 2 it was treated as a historical curiosity. So is it true that when looking inward you always see what you expect to see? Inward you always see what you expect to see. Have you ever had a dream in which something happened which you didn't expect? I mean, you probably have. So the statement, people only see what they expect to see, is not always true. And nullifying introspection was a mistake that wouldn't be corrected for 50 years. Now, what psychologists should have done was to develop techniques of consciousness inspection that would result in accurate data. Psychologists should have done what was to develop techniques of consciousness inspection that would result in accurate data. But they dropped the ball and they went down a wrong path. So consciousness might have been a dead subject if it wasn't for events like China's invasion of Tibet, which had the unforeseen consequence of turning Tibetan Buddhism loose on the world. Consequence of Tibet, which had the unforeseen consequence of turning Tibetan Buddhism loose on the world. Or the serendipitous rediscovery of LSD by a Harvard psychologist named Timothy Leary. Or the transcendental meditation fad that swept the world after the Beatles. Remember them? And in the 1960s, a human potential movement began that's still growing today, and its preferred method of research includes many varieties of looking inward. And the message is that the more you understand the operation of your own consciousness, the brighter, happier, and more successful you will become. Now, there really aren't very many people who disagree with that. Looking inward, learning about your own consciousness is variously called meditation, introspection, or self-examination. And there are skills in doing these effectively. Now, since consciousness is all around you, looking inward has nothing to do with the inside of your head. Yeah? Looking inward describes a specialized focus of awareness rather than a direction. I mean, you can look through a pane of glass, or you can adjust your focus and look at the glass. And you can look through consciousness, or you can adjust your focus and look at consciousness. So looking inward is a special kind of focusing. You're not trying to see your skull from the inside. And the fact is, you're not going to learn how to control or change or structure your life without focusing on your own consciousness. And the fact is, you're not going to learn how to control or change or structure your life without focusing on your own consciousness. And the second part of this is that you're not going to learn anything useful if you look with expectations, assumptions, desires, and resistances. If you look up at the ceiling and you recall that the ceiling once fell on me and it broke my leg, and now your observations are colored by that, you know, the more you think about it, the less ceiling you see. You know, looking and experiencing are about 100 times more effective than. Now your observations are colored by that. You know, the more you think about it, the less ceiling you see. You know, looking and experiencing are about 100 times more effective than thinking and remembering. And you know, 100 times more effective than thinking and remembering. And experiencing are about 100.
보고 경험한 것은
times more effective than thinking and remembering. And you know from the Avatar Define It exercises that you can cultivate a state of mind that just sees things as they are, uncolored by memories or judgments. And that state of mind is even more important when you focus on the influence that your own consciousness is having on your life. That state of mind is more important when you focus on the influence that your own consciousness is having on your life. So, this is the first skill level of looking inward. You have to look without judgment or expectations. And you have to look for what is there rather than looking through or dreaming or imagining what you would like or not like to see. Have you ever heard the expression, the fourth wall? Let me tell you about the fourth wall. It's an imaginary, invisible wall at the front of a theater stage, and through which the audience views a play. Movie sets are built with 3 walls, and the camera and the director sit behind the imaginary fourth wall, and the actors pretend that the fourth wall is solid. And so between the show and the people who are watching the show, there's this imaginary fourth wall. And what the fourth wall allows is, if you're in the audience, is for you to observe without any concerns for your safety, or without any concern that you're going to be called upon, or that anything will be expected of you. And the fourth wall wall allows you to meditate undisturbed upon the movie or the performance. Have you ever gone to a movie and you become so involved that you forget yourself? Yeah? That's because you have relaxed into the simple awareness that low lighting, comfortable seats, and the fourth wall encourage. And your bottled up consciousness identity has dropped away. Do you think that people realize that when they're going to the movie that it's a form of meditation? Yeah. It is. And creating a fourth wall between you and the show allows you to explore consciousness with subjective objectivity. In some circles, this is called mindfulness. So let me use this analogy of the fourth wall to go over the levels of looking inward from subjective objectivity. The first thing that you see when you shift your focus to consciousness is your life story. That's bottled consciousness. And okay, that's entertaining. And we've all spent hundreds of hours polishing our stories. But rewriting and re-editing doesn't really provide any real insights into the subject of consciousness, because the rewrites and the re-edits are done for someone else's consciousness. So we're still looking through rather than looking inward. The first level of looking inward is recognizing the emotional memories that the story stimulates. Feel-its. And the emotions are what you have bottled up. And now you're making some progress, because the longer you experience these memories, the more you will own them and the less attention grabbing they become. And the next stage of looking inward occurs after you have reviewed and re-edited the movie many times. You start to focus on the beliefs behind the emotions. Now you're beginning to understand the shape and structure of your mind bottle, and you're gaining valuable firsthand knowledge on the, about the core of the drama. And in the future, when you decide to deliberately direct your own movie as a source being, you can decide which beliefs to leave in and which beliefs to discreate. Otherwise, you get to shape the bottle. Now, after this point, most people don't pay much attention to their story. And the bottle is empty and there's just too much else to see. And you start to focus on various identities, relationships, that. After this point, most people don't pay much attention to their story. And the bottle is empty and there's just too much else to see. And you start to focus on various identities, relationships, values, intentions that are creating the world around you. And that brings us to the wizard's materials. The next level about focusing is focusing on the collective consciousness and learning how to shape it. So, I'm not going to talk about that today, but here comes the commercial. Well, I'm sure I've said something insightful about something. So, enjoy your home movies and please come to Wizards. Here comes the commercial. Well, I'm sure I've said something insightful.
It's a hard task. Selfless training, criticism training, how word is expressed. You are at this level, you're full of this, cutting up my fear to go on to self-determined in the room, go to work. Personal responsibility, honest self-determination, self-determination. Well, wisdom, compassion. Coordination, self-correction. It's just personal responsibility supposed to know. For exercise, I might entirely skip this process because I can explain because we put up here wisdom, capacity, more course of conviction, self-restraint. Doesn't mean you restrain yourself or something crazy. How good is it? What is doing this? What's concerned here? And that's good. Nothing wrong with it. Tolerance, separation, forgiveness. I have a lot of tolerance from the man or something. I tolerate the man because 내가 어떻게 보면 참았잖아. 그래서 consideration for this. consideration 나하고 너하고 다른 경쟁이 있어요. 다른 관계자들, 다른 단점이 그리고 단점을 고려해야 되고 다른 사람이 감정을 태양이 compassion, remorse, self-sabotage, impulsive, you probably this level, impulsive attitude, mood, self-sabotage. It's not really that self-sabotage. What this being is most concerned, feeling good, not feeling bad. Alcohol is a system of alcohol. Impulse to drink alcohol, attitude, mood, yes. Feeling good, compassion, remorse, compassion. Maybe compassion because it's political. I mean, compassion, there's nothing confess about drinking soda. 그러니까 음료수를 먹는 데는 뭐 누구한테 고백을 안 해도 누가 되겠어요. 그거는 좀 그런다. 알코올, 그러니까 알코올이 뭐야? 알코올이 뭐야? 알코올. 소주나 맥주 같은 거는 좀 그런 레벨이 있어요. 그러니까 조금 안 좋은 레벨이 있어요. 합법적인 하지만 안 좋은 안주. 그리고 음료수는 애들은 마찬가지예요. 그러니까 impulsive attitude. Impulsive, how word is it? Impulse to hurt me is met. Attitude. Attitude means just very good, very compassion. Compassion is your compassion is personal only self-ignorance at this level self-ignorance relates to self-ignorance. Study prediction. Study prediction. There was a book, say once, I love you, I hate you. This pleasure, I hate you. Do by two, there was the suffering, follow indoctrination. Do by two, there was suffering. Either a will device can be so strong that company that promise. The promise elevates to a certainty that is self-less. Do the right thing just for the trust. You have $1 million in your bank account and you don't have a memory of it. That implies suspicion of it. Even worse, your suspicion of people who are trying to tell you that you are a murderer. 그러니까 내가 백만장자가 아닌데 백만장자를 은행에 있다고 있지 않아. 그러니까 일단 지나서 you wouldn't have a murderer you. 내가 백만 원이 백만장자가 100만 원이 100만 달러가 있기 때문에 그렇게 내가 좋아하는 You could use money to fund your life that way to build the life. 내가 좋아하는 선택을 할 수 있으니까 You could decide to do it. You could do your favorite food and you could if someone who really convinced you that you were a leader. You could if someone who could really convince that you were a leader. You could, instead of sending pictures from this to 내가 you could with someone who could convince that you want to do it. Who could really convince that you want to do it. But going to take more than convincing, right? It's going to take more than something you to activate like a little motivation system like those things. The motivation trigger라는 게 우리가 자꾸 트리거해가지고 나를 정말적으로 믿게 하는 것이다. 그런 나를 충족하지 못한다. 그 완전 패스를 after you prove into the one has to be my life. There's no that told you about that. You're probably comfortable somewhat familiar with his theory from perspective. You won't be comfortable and somewhat familiar with his the world with his the sense in the world may well match with skeptical something in the world may that is something from the world that transcends in the world may well be met with transcends in the world. It is hidden treasure. You can't remember. It is hidden treasure. You can't remember. Transcending will is like listening memory. Transcending memory is like listening memory. But even more than transcending will 그렇게 대대적으로 내려오는 인지가 대대적으로 내려오는 인지가 100만 달러보다 훨씬 더 값없다. But like what millions don't take. But like what millions 잃어버린 100만 장자 100만 달러. It's going to take more conviction than this. It's going to take it's going to take 그러니까 100 million 달러가 있다면 그거를 경험하고 싶다는 거야. 100만 원보다 훨씬 더 귀하다. 전체적으로 내려오는 위치가 훨씬 더 귀하다. 나중에 그걸 알게 되는데 왜 중요한 거야? 왜 전체적으로 내려오는 위치가 중요한가? 이것은 사람이 돈보다 중요한 거야. 사람이 돈보다 돈이 있어가지고 그러면 그러니까 홀로 100만 장자가 내가 보기엔 이런 지금 보고 100만 장자가 있다면 좋은 작품에서 그렇게 믿고 있는 게 실제. 왜냐하면은 그렇게 믿고 있는 게 틀렸어. 대대적으로 내려오는 의지가 조금 더 강하다는 게 이유가 어떻게 하든 인생의 목표는 돈 내가지고 애를 낳는 거죠. 애가 더 값. 100만 된 것보다 더 값이 많이 들어요. Actually, really, still practice. Transcendent will, dominion, power, and where will. How does a where will transcend the will in a fifth level of where will can communicate I'm aware of my sensitivity of where will. Communicate fundamental reality. My lower levels of will. Pastor about the training, just keep it up there. Original reality. Perceptual reality. Cause and effect. Most people have been operating in cause and effect. 그러니까 대부분이 무슨 일이 일어났을 때 나타나는 현상으로 보고 있다. 대부분이. 그러나 솔직히는 나 같은 사람은 오리지널 하나님과 소통해가지고 그거를 autopilot. 그래서 autopilot functioning will generate motivating concerns or frequent or pushing concept concerns of becoming work. People exist in a phase of returning to an emotional will is more and more people more smoke, that in your body, your mind, motivation, is feeling transformed. Instead of resistance, time your person will, but always you can also recognize the presence of the presence is new, for example, a person that is very stressed and investigation, there's a case record of intellectual audience that is going on. This was during all this work, previous post that person consideration for favoring certain choices before the choice is up. In a sense, the outcome is highly predictable. If you have a gamble experience, this force of experience, you might win opportunity, but the lower the framework creates more outcomes. Prison person is human intellectual reason. Motivate for the growth. That I went to the casino and gamble and the controlling my body. Hidden principle and basic choice of the modern person. Lower rank, lower rank. Without effective education, people insist that a behavior regarding the self-centered education, merely exercise and self-determining will. Clearly find the specific smoke called she smoked by choice. I don't think by choice, but I call it unlistenable, insistent difference. Smoke for alcoholic these predisposed behaviors justify self-deception between the parents I think I don't find it pleasure in talking. I don't find it pleasure in talking. Back to the present, predisposed. Maybe that 자꾸 태어난 자극을 주면은 자극을 주면은 혈액들을 준다. 힘들어하고 담배를 피웠다. 진주감배를 피우는 인내들인데 앞으로 how often this is self-explicit or else the risk of physical time he would choose the risk. Okay? Choose this for the good of system and I will take physical system. They physical system genetic system or from some emotional reinforcement with indoctrination, I think it's just Fred is fitting to the illusion of self-dependence because he has not been awakened since transcending. Fred experiences the illusion of self-dependence because he is not because he has not been awakened to self-transcending self-equal. Think is virtuous. Fred experiences the illusion of self-dependence because he is not been awakened to self-growth. He's not aware of this predisposition. That is implied in the concept of predisposition. For instance, they match his pink backrobe. His choice is really motivated by lower instability. His choice is really motivated by lower instability. Emotional moral motivation may argue that being self-existent. It may be to wonder Fred having predisposing choices more than just his condition motivated lower instability. Like smoking. As long as you experience control motivated and the word predispositions in life have or compromise. That offer Fred choice between yellow and pink. That was good for both big and big bonds you can care about sometimes. He's achieved the ability to really accept determined choice based on what is in front of him, though he is just by subject to his dynamic. 그러니까 담배를 피면은 항상 선택은 필생활 한다. 담배를 피면 항상 필생활 한다. 왜냐하고 morbidly forcing to lower their small often not negative feelings away of tension. We talked to the Fred after the time about the best effort of whom and the so-called person. He thinks more and more expensive than whom and more expensive than to recover his life and his family. Yep, that's it. What does pink mean? Pink feedback? Pink feedback, 그러니까 자꾸 핑색이 뭐 적은 생각, 대비적인 생각. 그래서 자꾸 옐로우 슬리퍼를 옐로우 스트리프를 엄마는 주었으니까 핑 스리퍼를 선택했으니까 나는 옐로우 스리퍼를 선택해야지. 그렇게 느껴진다는 거야. 엄마는 대기력을 통해서 I would have my grandfather, not my dad used to smoke cigarette, but my grandfather used to smoke. The grandfather. 그러니까 내 할아버지가 옛날에 담배를 많이 폈었는데 아버지는 안 폈고 그러니까 일하러 가면 담배를 펴야 된다는 할아버지가 없으면은 담배를 피게 된다. 안무해도 아닙니다. 그거 아니까 어떻게 내 아버지가 없으니까 할아버지는 버릇 때문에